not have believed a national park could make a family disappear until I learned what happened in Death Valley. Not a lone hiker, not a drunk tourist wandering away from a campground, not someone breaking into a closed trail after midnight. A whole family, a man, a woman, and 2 children. They came from Germany in July 1996 during the kind of summer heat that makes Death Valley feel less like a park and more like the surface of another planet. Egbert Rimkus was 34. His girlfriend Cornelia Meyer was 27. With them were 2 boys, Georg Webert, 11, and Max Meyer, only 4 years old. They had flown into the United States, rented a green Plymouth Voyager minivan, and moved through the Southwest like thousands of tourists do every year, trusting maps, signs, roads, guidebooks, and the assumption that a national park cannot truly let you vanish. That assumption was wrong. They had a flight home booked from Los Angeles on July 27. They never made it. Before they vanished, they had visited Furnace Creek, bought a German-language Death Valley guide, camped in Analpa Canyon, and passed through remote places most tourists never see. Cornelia signed the family's names into a visitor's log at an abandoned mining camp and wrote that they were heading over the pass, most likely meaning Mengel Pass. A U.S. flag taken from the geologist's cabin in Butte Valley was later found in their van, proving they had made it into the deep backcountry. That is where the story turns from vacation into horror. Because Death Valley does not warn you in a way people understand. It does not put a wall in front of you. It does not say, this is where your vehicle stops being useful. It lets the road slowly become worse. A paved road becomes gravel. Gravel becomes rock. Rock becomes a washed out track. The map still shows a line, so your mind insists the line must mean passage. But in Death Valley, some lines are not roads in the way tourists understand roads. Some are scars left by miners, off-roaders, floods, and old mistakes. A minivan can enter them. That does not mean a minivan can leave. At some point, the family drove into Amble Spring Canyon. The canyon is remote, rocky, brutal, and far from easy help. Their Plymouth Voyager was not made for that terrain. It was a rented family vehicle with front-wheel drive, full of luggage, toys, camping equipment, and the ordinary objects of a trip that was supposed to continue. The van kept going until the desert took it apart. When it was found months later, 3 of the 4 tires were flat. The wheels were damaged. Investigators determined it had been driven for more than 2 miles on ruined tires over rocky ground. Inside were items that made the scene feel less like an abandoned vehicle and more like a family had simply stepped away and failed to return. A new Coleman sleeping bag, a tent, toys, and an unused tire jack. That detail always stays with me. An unused tire jack. It suggests a moment when they still had choices. Maybe they looked at the flats. Maybe they opened the back. Maybe they saw the jack and understood it did not matter anymore. Changing 1 tire is possible. 3 ruined tires in a remote canyon in July heat is something else entirely. The van was found on October 21st, 1996, by a park ranger flying over the area in a helicopter. By then, the family had been missing for months. The vehicle had also been reported stolen by the rental company because nobody knew where the tourists had gone. Imagine being the person who first saw it from the air. A small green minivan in an ocean of rock. No movement around it. No people waving. No bright clothing arranged for rescue. Just a vehicle where no vehicle should have been. Search crews came in. More than 200 search and rescue workers were eventually involved. Helicopters searched. Ground teams covered terrain around the canyon, nearby routes, old mines, passes, and possible shelter areas. At almost all times, dozens of searchers were working the case. And Death Valley gave them almost nothing. The most haunting clue was a beer bottle found more than a mile from the van, under a bush. The bottle matched beer found in the vehicle. Nearby, searchers found a cleared ledge and a seat mark, suggesting someone, probably Egbert because of the size of the impression, had sat there in the shade. That is the kind of evidence that feels worse than a scream. A bottle under a bush, a place where someone sat, a tiny island of shade in a landscape that was killing them. You can almost see him there. Exhausted, hot, trying to think, trying not to scare the children, trying to decide whether to go forward, backtrack, wait, or keep searching for help. Maybe he still believed rescue was close. Maybe he believed a military base, a road, a building, anything human had to be nearby. From above, maps make the desert look organized. Canyons have names, roads have lines, springs are marked, military bases have borders. But when you are standing there in July heat, with children and limited water, every direction is only more distance. The official search was called off on October 26, 1996. No bodies were found, no final campsite, no clear track that gave the answer. The family simply became part of Death Valley's silence. Years passed. Their relatives had to live with no grave, no certain sequence of events, no final words, no real ending. That is a kind of horror people do not always understand. A disappearance traps the living inside unfinished time. Death is terrible, but absence is different. Absence keeps asking questions. Then, 13 years later, two experienced searchers named Tom Mahood and Les Walker went looking again. They were not wandering randomly. They studied the case like a puzzle. They looked at the van's location, the terrain, the possible psychology of a stranded family, the clues from the original search, and the routes that might have seemed logical to someone in distress. Both were experienced hikers and search and rescue personnel. They understood desert travel well enough to ask the most important question. If I were stranded here, wrong about the distance to help, where would I walk? Mahood eventually theorized that the family may have headed south, possibly trying to reach the Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake boundary, perhaps thinking a military base perimeter would be patrolled or reachable in a way familiar from Europe. In that country, a military installation might suggest fences, guards, roads, and people. In the desert southwest, that assumption could be deadly. The boundary was far away, the terrain was savage, and July temperatures in Death Valley are not simply uncomfortable. They are lethal. The average high temperature cited for that period was about 116.5 degrees Fahrenheit. That means every step away from the van mattered. Every step used water. Every step increased exposure. Every ridge that looked like it might reveal rescue could reveal only another ridge. The desert does not have to chase you. It lets you spend yourself. On November 12, 2009, Mahood and Walker found human remains and personal belongings in a remote area miles from the van. The remains included bones from two adults, one male and one female, along with identification belonging to the missing tourists. Cornelius' passport and bag ID were found near the remains. Other belongings, including German writing in a wine bottle, were also found and attributed to the family. DNA could conclusively identify Egbert Remkes, and authorities were fairly certain the remains represented the missing adults. The children's remains were never officially recovered, though a shoe sole possibly belonging to one of the children was found. 13 years. That is how long the desert held the answer. Not hidden behind a locked door, not buried under concrete, just out there in remote terrain where even a large official search had failed to find them. That is what makes the story so frightening to me. It proves how small people become in a national park once they leave the safe route. And it proves how quickly national park can become a misleading phrase. A national park sounds managed, it sounds visited, it sounds like rangers' brochures, scenic overlooks, bathrooms, signs, gift shops, and emergency numbers. Death Valley has all of those things. But it also has places where a family can destroy a minivan, step into the heat, and become almost impossible to find. I keep thinking about the moment they must have decided to leave the van. Maybe they thought waiting was worse. Maybe the children were scared. Maybe the adults argued. Maybe one of them said they had seen something on the map. Maybe they believed the fastest way out was not back through the ruined canyon road, but forward toward help. Maybe they saw the desert opening south and thought it looked easier than the way they had come. That is the cruelest trap in terrain like that. The easier looking direction is not always the survivable direction. Walking away from a vehicle in extreme desert heat is almost always dangerous, but fear makes action feel like intelligence. Sitting beside a dead van with children in the heat must have felt like surrender. Walking must have felt like hope. So they walked. At first, maybe they tried to keep it organized. Adults carrying supplies, children urged onward, short rests. Maybe the bottle under the bush came from one of those rests. Maybe someone sat there and looked back toward the canyon, realizing the van was no longer visible or no longer useful. Maybe the little boy asked how much farther. Maybe the older boy understood more than the adults wanted him to. Then the sun continued. Water got lower. Shade became rare. The rocks reflected heat upward. The horizon stayed empty. By the time a person truly understands that he has misjudged Death Valley, the body may already be too damaged to correct the mistake. Heat illness does not feel like horror in a cinematic way. It feels like confusion, weakness, headache, nausea, bad decisions becoming easier. The mind dulls. The body stops regulating itself. People become irrational at the exact moment when they most need clear thinking. And there were children. A 4-year-old cannot fight Death Valley. An 11-year-old cannot make distance shorter. The adults could not carry everyone forever. That is the part I find almost impossible to think about. Not the discovery, not the van, the walking. A family strung out across desert terrain, trying to move towards something they believed was there. Maybe they still had the guidebook. Maybe they still had scraps of map. Maybe they could see mountains and thought a road had to be beyond them. Maybe one adult went ahead and came back. Maybe they stayed together until they could not. No one knows the exact final sequence. That uncertainty is merciless. The official facts give the outline. They entered Death Valley, drove into remote terrain, stranded the van, left it, and died after trying to reach help. The remains found in 2009 solved the core mystery of direction and fate, but they did not restore the human details. Death Valley kept those, and the park looks the same today. That is another thing people do not like about true horror. The place does not change because people died there. The sun still rises. Tourists still take photographs. Roads still shimmer. Gift shops still sell magnets. Families still enter with water bottles, maps, snacks, and plans. The land does not carry guilt. It does not apologize. It does not look haunted. That makes it more dangerous, not less, because a visitor can stand in Death Valley and feel safe, simply because other visitors are somewhere within the same park boundary. But the boundary is enormous. The safe places are not the whole park. The road you are on matters. Your vehicle matters. The season matters. Your assumptions matter most of all. The Death Valley Germans did not need a monster. They needed one wrong route, one unsuitable vehicle, one brutal summer day, and one decision to keep going until turning around no longer solved anything. That is why I think of them whenever someone says national parks are safe, because they are popular. Popular does not mean forgiving. Map does not mean understood. Beautiful does not mean harmless. And if you enter alone, the danger becomes even sharper. Because if a family of 4 can disappear in a rented minivan, then one person walking alone beyond the wrong bend is almost nothing. A dot, a heat source, a set of footprints that wind can erase. You can enter a national park with a reservation, a phone, a camera, a full tank, and a return flight. The park will not care. It will let you pass the visitor center. It will let you take the photograph. It will let you follow the line on the map. It will let the road get worse slowly enough that pride can keep speaking. And when the tires finally fail, when the air outside feels like an oven door opening, when the children ask where the hotel is, when the map no longer matches the ground beneath your feet, the park will not become dramatic. It will become quiet. That is the scariest part of Death Valley. Not the heat, not the distance, the quiet. The way disaster can happen in full daylight without a single scream reaching anyone. The way a green minivan can sit in a canyon for months before a helicopter notices it. The way hundreds of searchers can walk and fly and still miss the final answer. The way bones can wait 13 years in the open country. The way the desert can take a whole family and leave behind only enough to prove that it happened.